Hey, what's up? Did you know that a Moschops outdamages a Carnotaur? Ark Survival Evolved has a lot of different dinosaurs, and obviously the dinosaurs in Ark have different rates of damage, but the problem is that when you try and figure out how much damage each dinosaur does, normally you go to the wiki, but it's sort of incomplete. It mentions base damage, and you can find base damage pretty easily around on the internet, but base damage only tells you half of the story. According to the wiki, the Baryonyx and the Carnotaur deal 35 damage per chomp at base. And in theory, that means that the Moschops, who deals only 32 damage, should be worse at dealing damage than the Carnotaur. But what this doesn't factor in is the attack speed of dinosaurs. And as it turns out, the Moschops ends up killing things a lot quicker because despite having a slightly worse attack stat, it hits a lot faster. And that's why this video is here. We're gonna get some accurate DPS lists for dinosaurs so that you can know with certainty how strong each dinosaur is in comparison to all the other dinosaurs. I've taken it upon myself to test out all of the creatures so that we can have a concrete answer as to what dinosaur has what DPS and which dinosaurs you might want to try the next time you play Ark Survival Evolved. Before we get into the meat and bones of the video, let's have a quick look on how I'm testing the DPS and why I'm doing it this way. So the way Ark works is that wild dinosaurs come in different levels, but crucially, those levels are split among its stats. So comparing two dinosaurs of the same level, let's say 150, could give you different attack values, making it difficult to compare dinosaurs out in the wild. To solve this, I'm going to be using level 1 dinosaurs. That way we can guarantee that they all have the same level of investment into the attack stat. Secondly, the game has a handy dandy tool to test DPS, the training dummy, but unfortunately the training dummy isn't quite as simple as it seems. Firstly, the training dummy counts as a thatch structure, so the actual damage of the actual damage done to other dinosaurs is actually about 6 times less than displayed. But that's not all. There is a level of inconsistency that the training dummy has when using the 1 second DPS option. Firstly, because of the way it works, if you have to charge up an attack, let's say you're charging up an attack for 3 seconds, and once the attack is charged up, you do a total of 500 damage in a single hit, then the training dummy will read the 500 damage being hit, activated against the training dummy, and then it will look for more damage for the next second, and then spit out 500 damage as or 500 DPS. When in reality, because you've charged up that attack for 3 seconds, it should be closer to 166 DPS. In short, it's ignoring starting and ending animations of long attacks. But when using the 1 second DPS option, there seems to be an even bigger issue in that it is occasionally, or rather based on the monster's attack speed, counting damage across 2 sets of time testing, if that makes sense. So let's say you've got 3 attacks. The first window of the DPS would look at the first attack and the second attack and say it's got 2 attacks worth, so you're attacking 2 times a second. And then it'll look at the next window and go, I see the middle attack and the last attack, and so you're hitting 2 times a second. But in reality, you've only hit 3 times, so it's given you an extra attack's worth of damage. The long story short is that we're remedying this by bumping up the DPS checker to check for damage per second over 5 seconds rather than over 1 second. I felt like it was important to include here, just in case someone who knows about this is worried that I have only done this on the 1 DPS time setting, as it can skew results quite a lot. Personally, I've gone for testing DPS over the course of 5 seconds, as 1, it prevents the bugginess for using the 1 DPS setting test, or setting, the 1 DPS setting bit, but it also reduces the inaccuracy with human hands clicking the mouse badly to not have an optimal attack string. And the final thing to nip in the bud is that this video won't cover all the dinosaurs. I want to give each creature its own fair chance at the spotlight to highlight any of the weird extra quirks that they might have, because a lot of them do have weird quirks. And even if I only spent 30 seconds talking about each dinosaur in the game, that would still be getting up to a 3-hour video just on that. That might still happen, because it does feel silly to rank some dinosaurs but not others, but we'll split them up at least into separate videos. Either way, we'll start with the land-roaming carnivores that come from the original base of the game, the island. And within that, we'll start from the early level stuff and move up to the high level saddles. I've changed my mind. One extra thing to mention before we actually start with the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs' names are difficult to pronounce. You gotta bear with me. I'm not gonna pronounce them right. So starting at the start, we have the Carbonomies. Part of the reason why I wanted to make this video is because there are a bunch of weird jumps in DPS compared to the level that you can get the saddle available. The Carbonomies is not an example of this. It's a great early game monster with great early game stats, but its DPS is bad. It sits at 23 DPS against the training dummy, and that puts it on the bottom of the list in terms of DPS. But it's sort of supposed to be there. It's the first dinosaur, or one of the first dinosaurs you can have access to, and turtles are meant for defense, you know? Next up on the list is the ever-loved raptor. The raptor is a very different story compared to the Carbonomies. Raptors are proper killers, and they've effectively jumped 8 places up the ranking of DPS. Saying 8 places doesn't really mean much, especially for people in the future. Hello, how's the weather? That have the options to compare the dinosaurs in this video to future videos. So instead of 8 places, we can instead say that the raptor is an 130% DPS increase from the Carbonomies. And this is also before we factor in any potential bonus damage that might happen because of pack bonuses or alpha rules or whatever. Now, that seems crazy, and it is, but that's largely because the Carbonomies punches well below its weight, even though it's already at the bottom. And, more importantly, the raptor also punches above its weight. But, to put it into perspective, if we look at the percentage difference between the Carbonomies and the best possible DPS that we're gonna see today, it's a 952% increase versus the Carbonomies. So, a 130% jump in DPS isn't small, but it's also far from the top. Looking at the raptor here, it's probably a good example of one of the limitations of ranking dinosaurs in terms of DPS. Obviously, DPS is important, but for a dinosaur to be good, it needs to have much more than just DPS potential. So I guess this bit is the reminder for you to think of this video as an informative video about DPS and not what is the best dinosaur ever. Moving on to our next creature of Tooth and Claw, the Pulmonoscorpius. Despite its saddle being 4 levels higher than the raptor, the Pulmonoscorpius has an 11% drop in DPS compared to the raptor at 47 versus the raptor's 53. This is somewhat understandable, especially because the Pulmonoscorpius has a lot more utility compared to the raptor, as it's able to deal torpor damage, making it a useful alternative for taming dinosaurs rather than just killing them. The Pulmonoscorpius also has a really awkward bit for DPS testing because of the way its animations work. Hypothetically, its DPS could be a lot higher if you managed to get the scorpion to only use its sting, but there doesn't seem to be a consistent method of making it not use its claw attack animation, so there's that. The next monster on the rung is the Terrorbird, and the Terrorbird is normally seen or talked about as the upgrade to the raptor. Its saddle is 15 levels higher, but surprisingly, the raptor is actually still better in terms of damage per second. The Terrorbird comes in at 50 DPS, so you're losing 3 DPS a second. Yeah, you've lost 3 DPS by considering the Terrorbird instead of the raptor. But this is in terms of DPS. If we look at it on a wider sense of the picture, then the Terrorbird has an extra 70 points in health at base, So it's still understandable why the Terrorbird could be considered an upgrade, if not at least a side grade to the Raptor. Not to mention, this is all before you factor in the fact that the Terrorbirds have this amazing chicken flap glide. Moving on, we have the Sarco, and this is one of the creatures I was genuinely surprised by, as I've never really thought that they were overly strong, but it turns out that the Sarco punches well above its weight. Or at least it punches average compared to the last couple of things punching well below the Raptor. The Sarco comes in with a DPS of 88, making it the first dinosaur on the saddle ladder to actually beat the Raptor, but it also does this really decisively. 88 DPS is 66% better than the Raptor, on top of all of the other Sarco stats being generally better overall. I think part of the reason why the Sarco is often overlooked is because of its poor walking speed and its long body, making it very easy to get swarmed by hostile monsters. But ultimately, anywhere with good river access, allowing you to use the Sarco's really, really fast swim speed, makes the Crocodile a really appealing choice for a dinosaur mount. But I guess the value of the Sarco overall is going to fall off the further away from the river you get. The next available carnivore saddle is the Sabertooth, or the Sabertooth Tiger. And if we ignore the rather large DPS spike from the Sarco, then the Sabertooth is another viable small step forward from the Raptor. It's got a small improvement of 3 DPS, giving it a total DPS of 56. And it's not much, but considering it also comes with other minor improvements like an increase to weight and health, makes it a worthwhile tame if you've lost your Raptor at this point in the game. At level 39, we get access to the other crocodile in ARK, the Caprasuchus. Unlike the Sarco, this one isn't quite the heavy hitter. It has the same base damage as the Sarco does, but its attack speed is a lot slower, and it makes all the difference. The Capro comes in at the same as the Raptor, being 53 DPS, but don't forget, it's got some nifty tricks that makes it a very valuable ambush predator, as it doesn't really need to kill other dinosaurs, it just has to grab you off of one and then eat you instead. After the Capro, the next carnivore, technically, is the Arianomorphus. And if you thought the Capro was punching below its weight, I have some bad news for you. The Ariano comes in with a DPS of 39, which is still a 69% increase compared to our Carbonemy's bottom level, but it's quite far from being competitive for a level 40 saddle. And this is ignoring how difficult the Mega Spider can be to tame, considering you have to deal with bug repellent in caves. Far from a problem if you know what you're doing, but it might be headache-inducing for first-time tamers. On a similar note to the Capro, the Mega Spider is a specialized dinosaur. Its role is to shoot webs and slow down other creatures, so it sort of makes sense as to why it doesn't have a high DPS as well. It's a support dinosaur. Having the same level requirement for its saddle, the Beelzebufo is unfortunately in a similar situation. In fact, so similar that it shares the same 39 damage per second as its DPS stat. But unlike the spider, the Mega Frog is designed to kill things rather than as a support dinosaur or support spider, but it's a specialized dinosaur killer, and that's because it hunts bugs and turns them into cementing paste. So it's not really supposed to be killing the big things. So we've had a lot of dinosaurs seemingly hit below their weight recently, but just 5 levels higher than the frog and the spider, the dire bear really bucks that trend with a DPS of 105, which, like the raptor, it's punching well above its saddle level, and for 5 extra levels, it's gained 66 DPS against the Beelzebufo and the Ariano. And even compared to the Sarco's 88, which was our previous heavy hitter, the jump in DPS is still very significant. And obviously, the DPS alone makes them great dinosaurs to use, but they also have a slew of extra features that makes them kind of valuable as utility dinosaurs. They're really strong, and I can't really recommend them enough. If you've not tried them out, definitely try them out. But I'll stop I'll stop singing them praises because I know it's getting unbearable. Next on the list is the dire wolf, and because it's a creature that doesn't have a saddle, it makes it difficult to place in this order. I've put it here because it feels reasonable that if you're able to trank the other creatures around this point, then you'll also be able to deal with the wolf pack. And putting the dire wolves here at around level 45, the DPS is decent, if not still punching above its weight. Sitting at 88, dire wolves are very good, especially considering the pack bonuses that we'll come on to. But the other important thing to note here is that because they're saddleless, you can get them a lot earlier than about level 45. And if you can find an isolated one, or if you're capable enough to pick off the pack to get one of them left to trank, then having one early on will really, really be a wonderful time. But their real time to shine is with their pack bonus. Each additional member to their pack will give you a 5% damage bonus, up to a total of 20%. And on top of that, once the wolves are in a pack, the wolf leader, the alpha wolf, will be able to howl and buff all of the wolves in the pack, giving them a 25% damage resistance and a further 50% damage bonus on top of the 20% that they already have. And once you combine all of that together, a wolf pack can be one of the biggest sources of DPS in the game. You really can't underestimate the Howling Nightmares. Moving on up, we have the Carnotaur. The Carno deals a comfortable 74 DPS, which puts it squarely in the category of distinct upgrade compared to the earlier dinosaurs like the Raptor, the Sabertooth, and the Terrorbird. And it also comes with sizable increases to its other stats as well. But in terms of DPS alone, the Wolf is still slightly better. And that's a similar story for the Baryonyx, its saddle being unlocked at level 49, with slight improvements in DPS over the Carnotaur at 77 opposed to 74. It also helps establish a new baseline of mid-tier dinosaurs having around 70 to 80 DPS. The Baryonyx being stronger than the Carnotaur was surprising, given the previous trend for creatures that specialize in certain roles to have lower DPS as a whole, as a trade-off for extra utility. But I guess the Baryonyx's overwhelming domination while in the water wasn't enough to warrant a DPS nerf somehow. Speaking of overwhelming, at level 51 you unlock the Thylacoleo saddle, and it is the strongest marsupial in the game. Not only is the DPS of the Thylacoleo a very, very comfortable 91 DPS, making it punch up above its weight or its saddle level easily. But on top of that, the real cherry on top is that the Thylacoleo also has a bleeding, I think it's called a gnashed effect. What this does is once you've bitten a creature, the creature will start to bleed, and that removes 1% of the target's health per second for the next 5 seconds. And this means that not only is the Thylacoleo's damage really, really good for the level that you can start riding it, but it also scales really, really well against tough monsters. As the higher the monster's health, the more DPS you're getting out of its bleed effect. After the Thyla, the next saddle we've got is the Arthropleura, and as we're getting into the latter half of leveling, the dinosaurs / creatures that are being unlocked are getting more and more specialized. And specialized could also be a shorthand for bad DPS. The Arthropleura sitting at 42. It's pretty poor at DPSing things, or killing things quickly, in contrast to the other dinosaurs around its level. But you've got to remember that the centipede is designed to be a structure destroyer and not a dino killer. The Megalosaurus is where things get really odd, as it's hyper specialized. During the day, the Megalosaurus is really big. It does a pathetic 39 damage per second, on top of slowly accruing a sleep debt that once maxed out will force the Megalosaur to curl up and sleep until the debt has been paid back. But obviously, if it's bad during the day, that means it does something else during the night. And that's where the Megalosaurus truly shines. At night, it gains a huge damage buff and jumps all the way up to 197 DPS, which is utterly crazy and makes it a serious danger and not to be messed with at all. Compared to the Megalosaurus, Daeodon are not quite as hard-hitting. However, they are just as specialized, trading damage for healing. The funny-looking pig creature chocks in at around 66 DPS, which, while low for a level 59 saddle, isn't that bad when you consider the average mid-tier monster being 70 to 80. Pair that just below average attack stat with a very, very good health stat, and it's still a monster to deal with. The next land carnivore has its saddle unlocked at level 67, which is quite a bit of a jump, but the levels between are full of dinosaurs that we'll meet in future videos. The Allosaurus then is a really powerful dinosaur. At the very start of the Allosaur Wonder Ride, it starts with a very respectable 98 DPS, putting it just above the Thylacoleo, and it's also got a gnashed bleed effect, albeit a different version from the Thyla. In contrast, the Allosaur's bleed effect does less damage per second, doing only 0.5% of the target's health per second rather than 1%. But in response, or as a trade-off for doing less damage in the Gnash, it will also slow the targets down, making it very, very difficult for them to escape and run away. On top of all of this, the Allosaur also has a pack boost feature, where having an extra Allosaur allows the highest leveled Allosaur, the Alpha Allosaur, to gain a 50% damage boost, making its DPS effectively shoot up to 147 before accounting for the bleed, which is a seriously formidable thing to have to deal with. Speaking of formidable, we've got to talk about the Spinosaur, and this is a really, really heavy hitter. The Spinosaur has two main gimmicks. Firstly, it can stand up on its hind legs, and that allows it to do a more powerful swipe attack. And then the Spinosaur also has a hydration buff, so when a Spinosaurus is standing on water, it gains a damage buff. So starting at its weakest point, when the Spinosaur has been outside of or away from water for a while and is still on all four its legs, its chomp is going to do 112 DPS, which, as you'll notice, is already pretty stellar. Once you get him to stand up, that DPS increases to 147. And if you bring him to the water and then put him back on all fours, his DPS is going to rise again to 161. And once he's in the water and on his hind legs, it reaches the highest DPS on our list today at a whopping 242, which is so stellar that it is off this planet and, you know, halfway to Pluto. It's very, very good at doing damage. The Megalania, on the other hand, despite being a higher level saddle than the Spinosaur, does not do that much damage. It has a DPS of 26, which, even when sugarcoating it, is pretty bad. Again, it's sort of unsurprising, as the Megalania it's got a very nifty feature of being able to climb walls, which allows you to avoid monsters, which is arguably better than being able to kill them. On top of that, the Megalania also has Mega Rabies. So yeah, it's not super bad for the Megalania. After the Megalania, we have the king himself, the T-Rex. T-Rexes are tanky Spinos. And it seems like as a whole, people prefer them while facing ARK's bosses. And this is because the Rex is the unspecial version of the Spinosaur. Instead of having lows and highs, the Rex just has one average DPS across all situations. It does 130 DPS, and that's really, really strong, and it puts it in an interesting spot when you compare it to the Spinosaur. When the Spinosaur has access to water, the Spinosaur is going to completely out DPS a T-Rex. And if you're riding a T-Rex and you're riding a Spinosaur, even far away from the water, if you can make the Spinosaur stand up, it's going to do better damage. But if you're not riding it and it's just attacking, which is most of the dinosaurs that you're bringing to a boss fight, the T-Rex is going to do more damage. And on top of that, it's also got more health than the Spino, which is why people prefer T-Rexes for the most part. Above the T-Rex is its feathered cousin, the Utaranus. The UT is an interesting case because on its own, it's got DPS well below what you'd expect of a dinosaur that is locked behind one of the later game saddles. The UT clocks in at 77 DPS, which puts it on par with the Baryonyx, which is pretty low in contrast to its T-Rex cousin. However, the story isn't quite that simple because of the Utaranus's unique ability. Pressing the C button will enable the UT to roar, giving a buff to tamed dinosaurs within the vicinity. The buff itself is massive. It gives a 20% damage reduction while also increasing damage dealt from the tames affected by the buff by 25%. If we just add 25% of damage to the UT's DPS, then it would bump up to 96, which is a lot more in line with the unlock level of its saddle. But I'm not really sure that's an accurate way of looking at the DPS of the UT, as it can't actually buff itself. But don't underestimate the Roar Machine. If you're having a large-scale battle with multiple monsters, the UT is probably going to be your biggest source of DPS. If you've got a squad of 4 dinosaurs for your UT to buff, that's a 25% damage increase to each dino, which is effectively adding an extra dinosaur to the fight. If you've got 8 dinosaurs, you'd effectively be adding 2 dinosaurs to the fight. So the bigger your squad, the larger the DPS that your UT contributes to the fight overall. Finally, the Giga, the colossal mega dino. However, is the apex predator of the island truly a beast to be reckoned with? Or is it as overhyped as it is large? Did I secretly lie about the Spino having the highest DPS in the game? Well, no. The Giga's DPS is a paltry 96, which makes it worse than the Allosaurus. Again, that's not bad. All of the 90 plus dinosaurs have very good DPS, but for its size and its reputation, the Giga does not do a lot of DPS. But there are a few caveats to this. Firstly, a wild Giga is a serious threat, and it's incredibly powerful. It has the same bleeding gnash effect that the Thylacoleo has, on top of having an incredibly strong bite. The 69 DPS that we've got comes from having a tamed level 1 Giga, and Gigas are so strong in the wild that once they are tamed, their attack stat is reduced by 80%. So doing some quick maths, if our tamed Giga is at 20% capacity while doing 96 DPS, then a wild level 1 Giga would be doing a whopping 480 DPS, which is nigh on double the Spino's best damage options, while also having the deadly bleed to add more insult to injury. So I guess in short, if you see a Giga in the wild, run. I'd love to analyze these creatures and the weird intricacies between them more, and I'd love to give you just more opinions about the dinosaurs and creatures that I featured in this video, but maybe we'll save that for a video after we've done all the dinosaurs or something, as this video has already gone on for long enough. Please like the video if you want to see more ARK content from me, and don't forget to subscribe, but most importantly, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.